Felchi Road is Edo Biha. 1,000 welcomes to Crown of Biha short stories and poetry for March 22nd. I'm Terence O'Donnell, your Irish Schillet, with more stories and poems for medium writers. This week I have 5 short stories and a poem. The first is Chapter 8 of the ongoing story From Beyond the Water Wall, Chapter 17, the last chapter of the Sanctuary story, Part 2 of a science fiction story I read last week from H.R. Parker, a new science fiction story from David Pahor, an old tale from Europe by Ulf Wolf, and a wonderful poem that may trigger a fond memory from Connie Walkup Hull. So gather around and let me read to you for a bit. I will add in my commercial break after the first 3 stories today. I hope you'll listen to it and consider a donation. Any amount is fine. I use PayPal for your safety, as it allows you to donate without giving up any personal information, and you can use any currency around the world. It goes to support all that I give to bring these stories and poems to the world. So now let's get started with our first story, which will be Chapter 8, From Beyond the Water Wall, The Deal by Don Woodby. And he published this in the Fiction Writer's Den. Previously, after killing the soldiers who were chasing them, Mars and Wren needed to hide underground and wait until dawn. A slim sunbeam passed through the crack under the manhole cover and shone in Wren's eyes, waking her up. Mars was still asleep. She stayed still for some moments, resting on his chest, seizing that moment. With the passing of the night, they had slipped from the wall to the floor. His head was tilted, his body crumpled. It was exactly the same as she was used to. When he moved his head for the first time, her first instinct was to close her eyes. She didn't want him to know she had been awake. He opened his eyes and looked to the side. He carefully placed her head on his jacket and stood up. When he moved the manhole cover, the sunlight spread around the place. Wren opened her eyes as if she had just woken up. "I think it is safe to go home now," she said as she stretched her arms in the air. Mars nodded and smiled. They climbed to the surface, carefully examining all directions. The streets were empty. "Do you know where we are?" he asked. She shrugged. "Kinda." Wren led the way. They walked in silence. The stream seemed messier than normal. People rushed, unaware of their surroundings. The roadblocks were gone. Mars stuck his weapon arm inside his jacket, though. It was better not to be noticed. The walk back home was quiet. The few words they exchanged were simply trivialities, as if nothing had happened the night before. It wasn't a time to make any new plans. It was a time to enjoy their tiny victory and prepare for the day ahead. They passed by the market, looked around, and found no more soldiers. Their minds were a bit more peaceful. When they opened the door, a small dark cat sat on the couch and stared at them. "Hades!" she shouted, grinning. She ran toward the animal and put him on her lap. "I haven't seen him for like a week. I didn't know we had a cat." "For some years already," she said, lifting the expressionless cat in the air. "He ran away a few days before you arrived here." Mars gasped and froze for a moment. "I'm glad he came back now," his voice came out with a slight quaver. "Are you still sleepy?" she asked, looking at the couch. "We can go to the room if you want. I think I need to take a shower first. Your clothes are in the room." The bathroom door didn't have a lock. He took off his clothes and went to the shower. The water was cold, but the apartment was warm. He scanned the last day in detail inside his brain. The sound of the explosion still rumbled in his head. There was no guilt, though. He did what needed to be done. He hadn't even had enough time to think about his wife, the real one, and his daughter. His mind always had the habit of wandering around while in the shower. The sound of the doorknob plucked the thoughts from his head. Wren walked into the bathroom carrying a black shirt and a pair of jeans. Mars raised his eyebrows slightly, took a step back, and turned around. "I'm going to shower right after you," she said as she left the bathroom. Mars finished his shower quickly and went to the room to change his clothes. When he saw the bed, he decided to rest there for a while. His eyes were heavy. The sheets smelled fresh, and a big square white pillow made him feel like he was on the first day of the cruise again. The last thing he heard was the sound of the rain starting to fall. "You want some?" she asked, slightly tilting her head, looking at him in the eye. He nodded positively. "I didn't know how long you would still sleep," she said. "Did I make too much noise?" He smiled and sat at the table. She prepared a charcuterie board with cheese, cold cuts, and fruits and brought it to him. Were you able to rest? He asked. Yeah, I think an hour or two. When I got out of the shower, you were sleeping heavily. I didn't want to wake you up, so I lay down very quietly next to you. He looked down and smiled. Do you know how long we still have until we need to leave? Not much. Where exactly are we going to meet them? Do you remember the tunnel when we came back from the underground? She asked. There's an alley around there where we always meet. She got up from the table and put the dishes in the sink. I mean, if they even got the message. After that, assuming we do meet them today, how do we contact them again? We don't. Today, we set the date to deliver and bring the products. There is no contact outside of the delivery. It's how we decided it would be safest way to conduct business. Okay, let's see what happens, he said, moving toward the door. I'll clean those plates when we come back. A light but annoyingly insistent rain washed their faces as they walked downtown. The streets were somewhat empty. The neon lights and the usual gatherings were still around, but not many common people passed by. They tried to move in a way that wouldn't catch anyone's attention. As they crossed the city and went past the places he had grown accustomed to, Mars wondered if the soldiers he had killed had any meaning. They were simply casualties, forgotten in the name of a false sensation of safety. It's there, Ren's voice startled him away from his thoughts. It was a dark and empty alley. Puddles of water lay all over the floor. He could see why they would choose a place like that. Let's wait here, she whispered. I hope they come. The words barely left her lips when they heard steps and muffled voices coming from the street. A couple passed by the alley, looking inside, directly at them. Mars turned to Ren, who squinted and took a step back. Why did you put the sign? A man's voice spoke from outside the alley. The couple drew back. The man sauntered in front, ruffling his blonde spiked hair. The black bracelet on his right arm matched his sunglasses. The woman followed him closely with shorter steps, tying her long blonde hair with a pink barrette. They both wore jeans, white shirts, and black leather jackets. "We want to make a deal with you," Ren said, moving ahead. "We're the ones who set the meetings," the woman said, with a threatening voice. Mars put his hands on Ren's shoulders and stepped forward. "Hey, you're welcome for the beach rescue that day," the guy said, with a grim smile. "Man, it looks like that bullet took some years off your life." "It's fine," Ren whispered in Mars' ear, putting her hands on his shoulder. "That's right. Don't be too tense, my man," he said, moving closer. "We're all friends here." "Let's do business then, Spike," Ren said, putting herself between them. She then looked at Mars and squinted. "You already know each other." "I'm Abby," the woman said, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you both." There were sarcastic undertones in her voice. "She's new," Spike said dryly. "So what are we here for?" His voice became more relaxed. "I'm going to go straight to the point," Ren said in a low tone. "We need explosives. We know you guys can get the raw material." Spike put his hand on his chin. Abby kept looking to the side and behind her shoulders. "The deal will be like this," Ren continued. "You give us what we need to build them, and we give you half the complete product for free." Spike stood in silence for an instant before glancing at Abby. She shrugged. "Sounds like a good deal to us," he said. "What do you get from that? Why would you need bombs?" "This is not important for you to know," Mars said. "You just need to focus on the material." He looked at Mars for a moment and squinted. "Okay, we have a deal." "When can you bring us the stuff?" Mars asked as he shook his hand. "What do you think, Abby?" He turned toward her. "Would 2 days be enough?" Abby nodded. Spike looked around and lingered for some time until he spoke again. "Exactly 2 days from now, same time and place." "We'll be here," Ren said, turning around. Mars nodded and followed her. "Tomorrow we have the meeting with the fishermen," Mars said, "and the next day with those two. We should keep a planner." Ren smiled. "I already have one." "I should have imagined it." So then Chapter 9 will be next week. So now we have the last chapter of Sanctuary from Robert J. Longpriest's Sanctuary story. Chapter 17, Destroying Evidence and the Alien Technology Left Behind. And again, published in Life Through a Lens. Carrie clicked on the remote and the invisible shield was no more. Stepping away from the entrance, he led Anne into the trees behind which the Jeep had been parked. "The door is open. You can go in now," Carrie had called out. 3 of the men approached the entrance cautiously, as the shield had given them unpleasant shocks when they tried touching it before. Seeing that the barrier was gone, the leader waved to the women and children who were either in the vehicles or standing beside them. The 3 men went in first, followed by the women and children, while 4 remaining males stood guard, rifles ready in case of sabotage. It took several more minutes before the last woman trailed the children into the tunnel. Satisfied, the remaining 4 men rushed to join them. Ann and Carrie were in the Jeep and started down the road when they heard the sound of the spacecraft. Carrie stopped to look as the roof of the cabin began to rise. What was left of the roofless cabin wasn't damaged by the liftoff. The remaining 3 women and their children wouldn't be in harm's way. If Dorian had chosen the alternate liftoff option, using thrusters, the cabin would have been engulfed in flames. Both Ann and Carrie stared in astonishment as they watched the flying saucer slowly rise. "It's real," Ann uttered in surprise. When the squatters were in the house, Dorian took the opportunity to send a destructive charge of energy into the berm that had contained the disinfectant tunnels and chambers. His second charge was directed to the supply shed and his technology. There was no way he wanted the technology to fall into human hands. Humanity wasn't ready for that level of technology. He could see the initial panic that the explosions created. The men began to fire their rifles at the flying saucer, hovering 100 meters above the roofless structure, but to no avail. It was time to go. He took the spacecraft to hover just above the tree line to follow the road south. He found what he was looking for, a secluded meadow. There was no way he was going to go further south while there was light in the sky. He was waiting for Carrie to activate the GPS signal as well as for darkness. Once both were achieved, it would only be a matter of a few minutes for him to arrive at that location. 3 hours later, the two arrived in the town where Carrie had eaten supper the night before. The last of the day's light was already fading from view as he drove to the abandoned property where he had parked less than 24 hours earlier. There was still enough light to confirm that there were enough trees to hide the saucer from casual view. It would only be a temporary solution, with the need to find a place that was even more secluded. Walking to the center of the opening behind the trees, Carrie placed a GPS location device so his father would find the place with ease. His father had planned to wait above the cabin for most of the time Carrie had been driving in order to monitor the situation in and around the cabin site. Moments later, Carrie and Ann watched as the spacecraft slowly and silently descended to park in the clearing. 5 arms had extended from the base to serve as supports. Once it had settled, a ramp emerged to allow the passengers within the ship to exit. Dorian was the last one to exit. Once he was on the ground, he clicked on a remote to have the ramp be drawn back within the ship and be hidden by the hatch when they closed. No stray light was reflected off the surface. A person would almost have to bump into the spacecraft in order to know it was even there. "Time to eat," Carrie said, after giving his mother a hug and his sister a gentle poke. He led the way to the cafe, where he found the same woman once again at the counter. "Hi, Carrie. I have to admit that I thought I would never see you here again, especially since you were only here yesterday heading home." "Hi, Mrs. M. This is my mom, Dad, Sister Leslie, and my girlfriend, Ann. I told them all about you in this town. Our cottage in the north is not winter ready, so we are heading back to our place in the city. I told them about the great food here, and they agreed to stop for supper." The food isn't all that good," the woman said with a laugh. Turning to nod a greeting to Carrie's parents, she added, "Call me Dee," while pointing to her name tag pinned onto the apron she wore. "So what does everyone want to eat?" Leslie was the first to answer. "Do you have mac and cheese?" "Indeed I do. Leslie, isn't it? Macaroni and best cheddar cheese in the world. I suppose a young lady like you needs to have it with a side of ketchup." "Yes, ma'am." "What do you recommend?" Leah asked. She knew that most cafe meals were rarely cooked on site. The best meals were usually the daily specials, meals that were rarely on the menu. "Best option, in my opinion, is some fresh pickerel with thick homemade potato wedges and buttered carrots." "Sounds good for me," Leah returned. "What are you having?" Ann asked Carrie. "Same as I had last night, the all-day breakfast special." "Make that too, Mrs. M," Ann said to Dee. Like Carrie, she was brought up to respect adults, which included not addressing them by their first names. "I'll have the fish like my wife," Dorian added to complete the order. They gathered at the booth by the window, bringing an extra chair to place at the end, since there was only room for 2 on each side of the table. There was no rush to eat, as they knew they weren't going to be traveling anymore that night. All 5 of them would be spending the night in the spacecraft. As they sat enjoying the last of their meal, Dorian invited Dee to join them at the table. Leslie squeezed into the stall beside her brother, letting Dee have the chair at the end. Do you know if there are any homes we could rent or buy in this town? I'm not so sure that going back to the city is a good idea. It's getting pretty wild there. I have 2 small houses that I could rent out. One of them should be big enough for 4 people. That one is just down the street opposite the empty lot filled with trees. Dee answered with a curious look. There are 5 of us, Leah corrected. Anne is staying with us as her mother is in the hospital. Sorry to hear that, Dee apologized, as she directed a sympathetic look at Anne. The house is big enough for 1 or 2 more people, though it might feel a bit crowded. Would you be willing to let us look at it? Sure. Meet me here at 9 when I close the restaurant for the night. We can walk there, Dee laughed. This town is so small, we can walk everywhere in it. I don't ever use my car unless it's to go to the city for an appointment or for extra supplies. Good, Dorian replied. Do you kids want to come with us while Leah and I go for a walk around town? Can I stay here and use my tablet? Leslie asked. The sign says there's free Wi-Fi. Only if Dee says it's okay and your brother stays with you, Leah answered. It's okay with me, Dee said as she smiled. Young lady, what do you say to some pie and ice cream? As he walked through the town, more of a hamlet than a town, Dorian smiled, nodding his approval. The place would not attract many who were escaping the city. Besides the cafe next to the gas station, there was only a post office. There wasn't even a grocery store or any other obvious commercial enterprises. Perfect. What do you think, Leah? I think you're right. This will make a good place to hide and wait out the pandemic. Now it just needs the house to meet our needs. And so, looks like these folks finally found a place to hide out here. Good ending. I want to take a minute or so to advertise my website and to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going. I have set up a donation tab on the Connie Walkup Short Stories and Poetry website at rss.com and a donation page on my website at www.connieWalkup.com using PayPal for your security. This way there is no credit card info saved anywhere, and you can use any currency you wish around the world. Think of it as me passing my hat around to you at the end of my visit each week. If you like this podcast, please share it with everyone you know in your social circles, as the writers I showcase in this podcast deserve all the exposure they can get. I created this podcast for them because I love to read their work, and I believe it should be shared with the world. Now, I want to explain how to find my website, since this show is audio only. Just take the name of the site from the podcast logo shown here, www.connieWalkup.com, and search for it. The website domain name is Gaelic for the Tree of Life. It may be a little hard to find unless you know what you're looking for. Then bookmark it if you like it. Using the website for the first time, you'll reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. There you will see the homepage link at the bottom of the page. On the homepage, you can learn a little more about what Crown and Beyond means for a little bit of Irish culture and a little more about me in general. On the menu bar at the top, there are links to all the pages in the website. Feel free to look around. I have plenty to see. So thank you for your patronage and support. Now back to the show. So my next story is, as I said, part 2 from last week. And this one is entitled Firestorm, The Elementals Part 2. Fire Dances a Jig Under My Skin by H.R. Parker. And she published this in the Fiction Writer's Den. So last week, as I remember, was called Brainstorm. This serum will accelerate your powers, making them apparent. No one hides here. I hope you all burn. I don't struggle. The restraints will liquefy. Your friend put on a show, the facilitator says, flicking the needle. People were hurt. A smile haunts my lips. Good girl, Tempest. Don't replicate her behavior, Ember. His voice, like his hand, is icy. The serum floods into me. I'm ready to break free of this prison. Fire dances a jig under my skin. Lava oozes through my veins, a thick sludge. The restraints melt off. Fire surges. I howl with the power. So my next story is called Orbliss by David Pahor. The Imperial Navy assigns a military psychologist to all cases of resurfaced MIAs. I presume you don't want to sound noncommittal, so can you explain what that means? I steer awake at the tone of a woman murmuring to me through the pallid rays of the 2 moons I glimpse through the cracked walls of the colony's community center. Her voice is low and soft, reminding me of the sweet lady breath on my neck in a parked float car in a forgotten twilight alley. The plasticine ringed structure sits in a bowl-shaped depression between squat ridges, surrounded by gene-modified fruit trees gone rogue. The imported plants must have prostrated themselves before the evolutionary prepotency of the exoplanet soon after the colonists vanished 5 years ago. The sightless bird stares at me. In truth, it looks uncannily like a giant purple-feathered crow from Terra, with ruby bulges of wrinkled, quivering skin in places of its eyes. It continues to speak with her intonation, its beak opening and closing as its sable tongue struggles with the pronunciation behind the rows of serrated yellow teeth. However improbable, I am beginning to believe the creature standing beside my combat backpack is well-meaning. It shifts its weight, and her voice gains an edge and enters my head. Stop pointing the gun at me if you wish to live. Hurry, we should go. Making the wisest decision in my life, I slowly rise and follow it. Into the devastated landscape we step, leaving my comrades in arms to die in the morning, 23 hours after landing. The attractive military psychologist, with toffee hair desperately gathered in a bun and pretty knees that peek from her blue dress skirt clenched too tightly, smiles at me in the padded chamber with blinking holocams. Or just tell me how you feel right now. I shift my shackled feet as I lean forward, and my voice gains an edge. As I penetrate her mind, she starts screaming, her timbre no longer husky. Next is an old tale which I read decades ago from Europe. And it's a fairy tale. It's called The Crow by Ulf Wolf, published in Imogene's Notebook. Once upon a time, the crow was the most accomplished of all songbirds, and he knew it. And the world knew it. Every day, and long into the evening, even after the sun had set, and as the stars began to twinkle, you could hear him match their glitter note for note. Families at their evening meal would stop eating and make no noise with spoons and forks and plates, would even stop chewing when he set out again in song, whether from afar or near. Perhaps he would sit in their garden apple tree near the open window, and no one at table would say a word until the crow had finished his song. So enticing were his melodies, so pure his notes. Even the stars seemed to twinkle a little less while he sang, the better to hear. Once done, the crow would shift slightly on his apple tree branch and cock his head in the direction of the candlelit kitchen, the better to hear the silence softly cease by resumed movement of spoon to soup, of fork to mouth, and by the father praising to his children the song just sung. And then he would, as often as not, spread his wings and roam the air for another meal to interrupt, for another attentive silence and subsequent fatherly praise. Most other birds were jealous of his song, this to varying degrees. The wren was not only jealous of the crow, but a little afraid too, the crow being so large and the wren so small. The finch would stop singing whenever he heard the crow, so ashamed was he of his own meager melodies. The barn swallow had an easier time of it. He knew that he could fly so much better than the crow, and while he could not sing as beautifully, he would dance away his shortcomings in swooping and airy circles. The warbler, as a rule, was too busy to worry one way or another, but knew in his heart that the crow had the most beautiful song in the world. The sparrow would tell his children to stop talking when the crow began his song. It was impolite to disturb such a master, and maybe if they would listen more closely, they would learn a thing or two. The crow would hear this at times and smile to himself, satisfied that respect was shown even in the smallest quarters. Of all the many songbirds that envied the crow, only one bird was not intimidated by him, and that was the nightingale. The nightingale could sing. There was no doubt about it. The crow knew this, too. This irritated him a little. But while all other songbirds would hear the crow and think to themselves, "Oh, listen to him. I will never sing this well, no matter how hard I try," the nightingale, upon hearing the crow sing for the first time, thought to himself, "Aha! That's how well you can sing." and set out to learn to sing like the crow by practice and practice and more practice, often long into the night. And with each season, the nightingale sang a little better, and then a little better still, while the crow, singing in his mind supremely already, did not bother to practice or improve. For really, how do you improve on perfection? He was more than content to dazzle the world with the gifts he had. And the world turns many times, and circles the sun many times, and the nightingale sings more and more beautifully, until one night the father at the dinner table motioned his family to hush and listen. No, not to the crow, but to this new song, the one almost as beautiful as, some even thought more beautiful than, the crow's. And spoons and forks grew quiet, and no one chewed for the span of the song, and then the father wondered aloud who could have sung so well. If the nightingale heard this, he didn't care, for he sang for the singing, not for the praise, thinking that someday soon he would be ready to seek out and sing for the crow, to share with him what he taught the nightingale, a thank you of sorts. But before the nightingale could seek him out to proudly share his now much improved song, the crow had heard about him, and was none too happy with the news either. "Sings just like you," said the raven. "Sings as sweet as anything," said the kestrel. "A little marvel, that nightingale," said the mourning dove, none of which the crow took kindly to. And the more he heard about this little upstart, the grimmer he felt. Soon it seemed there was not a bird he met that did not relish pointing out that the nightingale's song was almost as beautiful as his. None dared tell him equal to or more beautiful than, though many now thought so. One evening the crow had had his fill of these nightingale news, and set out to find this little upstart to assess the situation for himself. For surely they were all exaggerating and telling lies, envious of him as usual. Over the darkening landscape he flew, ears straining for anything even approaching the beauty of his own song. Over misty field and muttering brook he flew, over copse of birch and linden he flew, using his wings sparingly the better to hear. Over village and homestead he flew, over town and marsh. Over lesser songs by lesser birds he flew, growing more certain by the mile that he had been misinformed, surely. Until, softly on the wind at first, more like a memory than song, a younger song, many moons ago. But with each long and now more and more eager beat of anxious wings, the song grew stronger, and now assumed direction as well. A manor, a house the size of a manor anyway, up there by the foot of a long and lazy hill, birches climbing. A garden, a large and well-tended one, with many groomed trees, and from one of these, the closest tree to the house, but one, a pear tree, rose the song. It was as if the tree itself sung, for the crow could not yet spot the singer, so small was the nightingale, who perhaps had become song by so much practice. Then, too, he saw the singer. A drab little thing with soot-black eyes, a mouth agape and pouring into the evening. The crow could not believe his ears. It was the most beautiful song he had ever heard. He glided around the pear tree once, twice, thrice, never taking his eyes off the little singer, who appeared unaware of the crow's presence. But surely wasn't, for had the little bird not raised his voice a little, brought on a new clarity, more beautiful still? Then he swooped for the branch, and only at the last moment held up, and landed not a wing's width from the nightingale, with such an impact that the branch gave away, and then swayed up and down for a while. This abrupt arrival stopped the song dead. Wide black eyes stared up at him. They should have, but held no fear. "What do you think?" said the nightingale, once the branch had come to rest. "What do I think about what?" said the crow. "What do you think about my song?" "Is that what you call it? Don't you? It's all right, I guess, for an amateur." If the nightingale took offense at this, he did not show it. "I have been practicing every day and every night," he said, "ever since I heard you sing and realized how beautiful song can be." "Are there more of you?" asked the crow. "Of course. How many?" "Many." "Do they all practice?" "Oh, no," said the nightingale, "only I." The crow seemed happy to hear this, for he nodded his head a few times as if accepting a satisfactory turn of events. Then, without warning, the crow struck the little bird with his strong wing, and the singer tumbled stunned to the ground below. Before the nightingale could recover, the crow was upon him, pinning the little gray body to the ground with sharp talons. The nightingale, getting his bearings now, opened his beak to wonder what on earth which was precisely what the crow was waiting for, and in one swift, vicious strike, reached into the little throat with his strong beak, ripped out the little bird's throat in a tiny rain of blood. The nightingale shuddered, but stayed alive. The crow, mission complete, rose into the air, and after several lazy beats of satisfied wings, dropped the ripped-out red voice of the nightingale into the mist now rising. He did not hear it land, nor would he have cared had he done so. Terpsichore, whose world embraced song of all kinds, including that of birds, and who had been listening to the nightingale with delight, saw everything. More stunned even than the little bird, who still remained on the ground, and breathing only with difficulty, she descended into the garden and soon found where the crow had dropped the torn-out throat of the little singer. Gently she retrieved it and brought it to her lips and kissed it. Carrying the now golden throat in her cupped hand, she walked over to the nightingale and kneeled by his side. Large black eyes, cloudy with pain and slowly receding shock, tried to make sense of what they saw as Terpsichore brought the now healed throat to the little beak, softly opened it, and restored the song to its owner, gilded now with the muse's kiss. The pain cleared from his eyes, and the nightingale scrambled to his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "Terpsichore," she answered. "I am Song." "Terpsichore," he repeated. "You are magical?" "What is magic?" she answered, "if not that which we cannot readily grasp?" "So you are magical," he said, "if you will." "The crow?" asked the little bird. "Gone," said Terpsichore. "He," began the nightingale. "Yes, he did," she said, then said, "Sing for me." "I can?" he wondered. "Of course." So the nightingale drew breath into lungs that felt larger and fuller than ever before, and gave voice to the wonder of magic with such clarity and volume that the lord of the manor hollowed his fork mid-air and paused. "Do you hear?" he said to the dinner party. "The crow?" "Only more beautiful," said his wife. The oldest daughter rose and walked over to the window to better hear and perhaps catch a glimpse of the crow. What she saw no one later believed, for she saw Terpsichore rise with the nightingale in her hand, only to dissolve, to let the little bird take wing and settle on a branch close to the open window, where he took up the song anew. "It's not," said the daughter. "It's not the crow." "It isn't?" the wife said. "It isn't," said the wife, and rose to take a look for herself. Soon the entire family was crowding by the window, stunned by a little performer who sang like he had never sung before. The crow, meanwhile, pleased with a job well done, settled in for the night miles beyond the lazy hills. He was soon asleep, but in the night he had a terrible dream. And in this dream, as real as anything, he found himself pinned down to the damp grass by a crow many times his size, with talons like tongs and eyes like hate. The giant bird then reached into his mouth with a beak like two javelins, and down his gullet to the heart of his song they pierced, and then pinched, and then tore it all out in one vicious tug, a small shower of blood. The pain startled him awake. He found he had trouble breathing, and out of the pain that could not linger from a dream, he thought, but which lingered none the less, grew a cold and hollow absence. For in the place of the well whence his song would rise, there was nothing. Nothing. A rising suspicion brought a fear cold and terrible. This had been no dream. Trembling now, and despite the hollow pain, he tried a note, but no note came, only harsh grating of rocks crashing. He tried again, and more rocks sundered. After many dark and bewildered thoughts, he took to wing and left the lands of men and many birds, and did not return for longer than memory can fathom. And when he did, and called to announce his arrival, a little boy tugged the sleeve of his father's jacket and said, "What bird is that? That big black one crushing rocks with his throat." And now my last piece of the day is a poem, Song of the Old House on the Hill, a poem by Connie Walkup Hull, published in Imogene's Notebook. We like to believe we are built for eternity, but life has other plans. It moves us along, sometimes roughly, sometimes gently. Physical beauty fades. It makes way for the fresh and new. People move on to other loves. It's the way of things. I am called the house upon the hill, fair lady, old and graying, no longer young nor beautiful, lithe timbers dry and scaling. Muttering, useless old woman I, of wrinkled, shriveling face, and windows lost as fallen teeth, youth gone without a trace. Bleached and peeling skin is shrinking, skimming, tottering bones that hold me. Once where I stood so valiantly, now I rock so gently. Remember brilliant summer days. Children's laughter filled the sky, and I made love endlessly with a storm long since passed by. I thrilled to green of velvet lawn, cascading flowers as hair cascaded, counting grains of sand and dancing in sunlight that is faded. Children gone, house now neglected, other places found to play. Sometimes I hear the baby steps, sometimes hear music far away. I, the house upon the hill, ancient dame of numbered day and numbered memories, I sit and dream, I sit and pray. And then she writes a note here. Thank you for reading. I appreciate you always. Hold on to the light that fades so quickly. And that's very true. So that's all I have for you this week. All my stories and poems. I hope you liked them. And as always, I hope to visit with you again next week. Slancha. Gara Mahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. Maybe one of them might touch your heart a little. Disclosure for everyone. In order to read the complete stories and poems, you'll need to sign up for a subscription to Medium. If I see a link by the author on one of the stories to allow everyone to read it, I will let you know in the newsletters. Please return again next week for another episode of Crown of Biha Stories and Poetry. As a Sean K., I want to continue to delight you with a story or a poem that may bring you a smile or make you think a little bit after we part for the day. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. Long life and fair health to you. Salfada Augusprech, Slanche Chukwad, Slango Foil. Goodbye for now.